And it's just like that with law enforcement. It's like that with
Yeah.
anything else. And I try to remind people, and I had to remember because I talk to people again about law enforcement interaction all the time, that these are just regular folks doing
Right.
a very, difficult job that some people don't do well. And but when they don't do it well, it's not just a poor experience. It could end up into a loss of life.
With a long career in law enforcement, author Derrick Dotson has written The Police and Me, a book for parents and children. It focuses on how to have safe interactions with the police. Derrick also talks about the negative interactions he has personally had with law enforcement. Today, his mission is to close the gap between police and the community. This is All the Way Authentic, and I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.
My background specifically has been in law enforcement. So I started in law enforcement um, here in Washington State. Started with the Washington State Department of Corrections, doing field investigations. And with that, I had a lot of great opportunities. After that, I worked for the U.S. Marshals Service, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the U.S. courts, United States courts. I've also worked for a local police department in a task force capacity, Renton Police Department. And, having those opportunities across federal, state, and municipal levels of government and law enforcement gives you a very broad view of how these things work, how people are impacted, whether it's just the general population, when you get into the nuances of race and ethnicity and these types of conversations and that subject matter, you get to see a very broad view of this, particularly as a Black man, looking at it like that. It's and having certain experiences myself, even while I was in law enforcement, and we can talk about that, but having those experiences behind the badge and opposite of the badge is very unique. And the things that I share with people, the work that I do, really impacts people because I can speak from it. I can speak from a personal point of view, even when I'm speaking professionally. I can talk about what it looks like on the law enforcement side, but I've also been targeted by police. I've been pulled over more than anybody I've ever met. I've been pulled over more than 4 dozen times, beginning when I was 16 years old. And, stop and frisk. I grew up in New York, so stop and frisk was a thing. Been held at gunpoint by police. My cousin was killed by police, which was very tragic for our entire family. And, but he was killed while I was working in law enforcement, which just imagine the duality of that, right? Working on both sides and living my personal life and having that professional experience and trying to understand how these types of things happen or explain to my family why these things happen, and those types of things. And I have two other family members that have also sued police departments successfully for police brutality. The things that I talk about, I've either experienced directly or I'm connected to it one way or another. And the benefit of that, I look at those experiences now as great testimonies and great experiences because I can share that with other people when it comes down to how they interact with law enforcement, what they should and should not do. Those sometimes even with the tragedies that people experience, I can speak to that. And it puts me in a very unique position to be able to have these conversations. And where I really have focused and where I started is talking to kids. The subject of law enforcement and police reform, depending on who you talk to, it's, people get uptight and upset about it. I enjoy the fact that, I focused on kids to begin with, because when you focus on children, nobody wants to argue with that, right? We all want our kids to be safe. I don't care if you're law enforcement or not, what race, ethnicity you come from, who you pray to, who you love. We all want our kids to be safe. And so I started there, and because that really has unified people. And then working with preteens and teens, and then just the general public about a lot of these issues regarding law enforcement and police reform.
Well, you answered about 4 or 5 questions I had, so you're making my job really easy. But I wanted to backtrack a little bit because as a black man
Sure.
and as
Yeah.
a person who has had some negative interactions with the police for various reasons, and then you go into law enforcement, were you ever conflicted, or is that because sometimes I think, okay, you go into law enforcement, you have nothing but positive feelings about this career that you're going into. But as a black person, knowing that, even maybe some of the officers or other personnel that you worked for could potentially even be racist, was that hard, or did it just kind of make you a little bit more determined to do to your to do your job a certain way and do it in a way that was most effective?
That's a that's a deep question because I started thinking immediately, and I had some emotions that hit me right there too. I did not, so I've had, my second traffic stop I ever had was, um, it was a bad traffic stop. The officer totally violated my rights and then lied, blatantly lied. This isn't my opinion. He lied about what happened, and but when I went to court, the judge asked me, I can share the story with you really briefly if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
sure. Sure.
So I'm 16. I'm headed back to my high school, to lift weights. And my father, took his personal vehicle to go back to school. And I had just gotten my license, and I'm passing this patrol car right on the last stretch of road before I got back to the high school. And I'm passing, and these two officers are sitting in the car, and I could see their faces, like the mouth just drops open, looking at me, right? And I'm like, oh man, this is no good. And, of course, I look in my rearview mirror, they make a U-turn. I pull into the school parking lot. Once they got behind me in the parking lot, they put on their lights. And I pulled, but I was ahead of them enough that I pulled into a parking spot. The officers, I'm sitting in the car, put my vehicle in park. And as soon as I put it in park, the door flies open. And the officer grabs me, grabs my jacket, and tries to pull me out of the car. And I couldn't get out because I had my seatbelt on, right? Remember that. And I unbuckle my seatbelt, pulls me out of the car, pulls me back to the patrol car. His partner starts searching my vehicle without my permission, and started going through everything, started pulling out tapes out of my boom box. And for those who don't know what a boom box is, it was a very big radio with two big speakers, right? You might have a double cassette deck. Cassettes were these little like musical types of devices,
I know
and they
exactly. I
had
had a
tape.
few of those
Oh, I
back in
know
the
you
day.
did. Some of your listeners might not know, so I'm just saying. And so they went into my boom box and they ripped out my Eric B and Rakim tape, ripped out my Wu Tang tape, messed up my tape. Of course, I was mad about that. And but they're going through all of my stuff, and I finally say, I'm like, officer, what's going on? And he says, there was a break-in at the police station last night, and 4 patrol cars were broken into. What do you know about that? And I said, nothing. I didn't do that, officer. And he was like, oh, okay. Well, do you know who did it? And I said, no, sir. I don't know anything about that, right? And so um, he tells his partner just to cut it, and the search. And then I go back. He sends me back to my vehicle. I sit in my car. He comes back up with a ticket for failure to wear a seatbelt. Blatant lie. And so, yeah, he tried to pull me out. Seatbelt was on. Couldn't even do that. I was livid. At 16, I was hot about that. And I went to my, I got home and showed my parents the ticket. And my father was like, you weren't wearing your seatbelt? And I was like, no, Pop, I was wearing my seatbelt. But he was like, well, the man says you weren't wearing your seatbelt. And I'm like, he tried to pull me out of the car and couldn't get me out because I had my seatbelt on. And he's like, he tried to pull you out of the car. And I'm like, yes. And then they searched my vehicle. And now I didn't know anything about the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment. I didn't know anything about that at the time. I just knew it was wrong. And everything, the way I was treated, the way that they went about it. And I told my father, I said, this is wrong. And this ain't right. And I don't want to pay it. I don't think we should pay this. And my parents looked at each other and was like, okay. So we went to court, got to court, and the judge, he asked, once I explained everything, he asked me, he said, do you think this traffic stop was racially motivated? It's a white judge. And of course I'm 16, right? And the way that things had, happened, and in my mind, I'm like, yeah, it was racially motivated. But even then, I knew I can't really prove that. And so what I said to him, I said, Your Honor, this is, I don't know if it was racially motivated. It could have been, but I just know it was wrong. And before I could say anything else, he cuts me off and says, I believe it was racially motivated. Case dismissed. Bangs the gavel. The two officers are in court. And he looks at them. He's like, I want to see you in my chambers. And I love that because at that point, it taught me the legal system can work and it can work for people that look like me, regardless of what I had been told. And mind you, my parents had never said a positive word about police. My family, a lot of my family members, extended family, had been in and out of jail or prison. I'd never heard a positive word about police, didn't know how to interact with police safely. And this was a different experience. Now, although my rights were totally violated, I knew it was wrong, but I saw justice prevail in that situation, and that changed my outlook about maybe there's more to this. So when I was in college, my major was clinical psychology and social work. I went to Norfolk State University. I'm a graduate of Norfolk State University, one of the best HBCUs in the land. I have to put that out there, and we I had an opportunity to work for the United States courts as an intern, and that internship really opened my eyes to a lot of what was out there between working with the U.S. courts, the DEA, the ATF, FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office. I learned a ton at that internship, and it changed my focus on how I was going to pursue this job. Like if I was going to actually do this. Now, mind you, I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to become a psychologist at the time, right? That's what I went to school for. But after that experience and seeing the entirety of the Department of Justice and all of that, I was like, I want to be a part of this in the U.S. court system and working with local police. I saw an opportunity. I said, yeah, I definitely want to be a part of this. And excuse me, it changed my view about what I could possibly do and the impact that I could make. Fast forward, when I first entered my career in law enforcement, there was some hesitancy, especially when I did task force work, when I was working with other agencies. So if I'm not working with the agency that I work for directly, I'm working in collaboration with another agency, and some of those are police agencies. And I would walk into a police station, and the way that I interacted with officers, it changed. I was professional, but at the same time, I felt some anxiety about it just because of previous experiences. And that traffic stop I explained wasn't the only thing that I've dealt with at that time. And having these experiences and looking at that, being in this place where now I'm interacting with these random officers, white, black, whoever, majority white, and I'm thinking, how do they see me? What do they think of me? And there was some insecurity there, I'll admit, about how I approached it. But what really stood out, and I think the reason why I'm here today and had the opportunity to work for so many agencies is being confident. And I know people don't like to really embrace the idea that as Black Americans we have to be better. It was a situation where I had to be better, and I had to know more. I had to be more thorough, and that stood out. That stood out not just because as an officer, but as a Black man. And being here in the Northwest, where we're 4% of the population, a lot of these folks didn't, the only time they really come into contact with people of color is when they arrest them. And so they don't really, and that was for sure when I was interacting with a lot of people, because they would ask me random questions about Black culture, and I'm like, you don't know this, and so it really opened my eyes at that time. Like, all right, I can have a different impact here, but also having family members that had been in and out of prison, in jail, on probation and parole, and those that have had their rights violated. I had my rights violated. Of course, I approached it in a way where I was much more empathetic and understanding about these types of things. And I think that's what's missing from policing. One of the biggest things that's missing from policing is having that level of experience and especially operating with the level of empathy that I think would really impact how they do their jobs.
Well, and that's a nice segue into your company. Why don't you tell me about that and how that relates to what you've been talking about, it, especially when it comes to officers and empathy and how they approach the job and interact with people. And one thought comes to mind because you were talking about, um, just the whole thing of being only 4% of the population here in the Puget Sound area and all that. But I remember when I worked at the city of Bellevue for like 20 years, and I worked in a certain department, and we would have these softball tournaments that we would play in. So I was in the parks department, but we play the utilities department, and you kind of do this round robin thing. And I remember we wound up playing the cops, basically the police department. Now, the police department, of
Mm-hmm.
course, isn't in their uniforms. They're just out there in the shorts and the t-shirts and the tank tops like I am. Well, I didn't even think about them being cops until about almost to the end of the game. And I went, wow, these are the cops that we're playing. Okay.
Yeah.
But they're just like regular people, right? We're laughing and drinking
Mm-hmm.
beer and whatever. And then the next day I saw them in City Hall, the same people walking around in their uniforms. And I have to admit, I had a different, it wasn't anxiety, but I definitely was more distant, and it's like, okay, oh, okay, the uniform, all of these kind of images started kind of popping into my head. And I didn't look at them as favorably, I guess. I looked at them not with hostility, but I looked at them as someone to be a little bit wary of, because they put the uniform on. So tell me about your company, though, and how the kind of work that you do.
You know, I Yeah. Before I say that, I
Yeah.
think that's I totally get that. On how you can perceive police in those situations, and I think that's another reason why I emphasize community engagement with law enforcement is a big deal. Not just so the community can see, the officers that are just people. These are just everyday, regular human beings. I know people like to just assign the word hero to police. I don't do that. I think you need to, go beyond the call of duty. You need to show courage, and just assigning people that hero badge, I think, has done a lot of damage because I think that it also brings a level of entitlement, to that profession. And so I think when I look at, that level of community engagement, it's important that communities can experience their police department, the people that are charged to protect them, have those positive experiences, interpersonal interactions, and I think that's great. But it's also really important for the officers that to interact with their community. If you don't do that, and let's say you come from, not picking on anybody out there, but if you're from like middle of nowhere, Montana, right, and the only Black folks you've ever seen have been like, if you watched an episode of The Wire or a Wu-Tang Clan video, that's it, right? And so now you take these types of these stereotypes or whatever it is that you have started to believe, and now you start putting that to practice in a very biased way. And that's, I think, is a big, it's a big challenge for police departments to, it's a big challenge for them to do that level of community engagement, not just for the community, but for the officers to get that experience. Because if they haven't had that anyplace else, and now I say take that same person from middle of nowhere, Montana, and throw them into a predominantly Black area or these types of things, culture, verbiage, the behavior, the mannerisms, all of these things. It's a big deal. And if you don't know how to do that, now all of a sudden you're put in a hostile situation or a high stress situation. Man, it's I think you start going towards that level of where things start to escalate and you start, moving towards, these things that we see on television through the media. And I think we can avoid a lot of that when we start to understand who we are as a community. And, these officers are part of the community. They're
Right.
just people that live here. They just have a very complex job that some of them do well, some of them don't. But
Right.
when it goes badly, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Um, so, my company, when I started my company is called the Black Sanctuary. And I started this in 2020. This is after all the high profile police shootings and, murder that we saw in George Floyd. And it really irritated me. Man, I was so irritated at the idea that you would have these, primetime news, media folks, and they would the Tucker Carlsons and the Don Lemons and the Rachel Maddows, right? And they are talking about these things in a way that was very provocative. It didn't help anything, and it irritated me because I'm like, this is an opportunity. We're all stuck in the house because of the pandemic. Everybody's glued to the television. Everybody's seeing these shootings and this murder and all of this stuff, and they're already scared to go outside. Now, if you're Black, you don't want to go outside because you think something bad is going to happen to you if you interact with the police. Mm-hmm. And they had an opportunity to teach, and they didn't. And I'll never forget the one thing that, there were several things that got me going in this direction, but it was an interview that Don Lemon did with this other guy. He was former law enforcement, and I think he's a professor now, but he was explaining why the police used force in a particular situation. And the guy was 100% correct. It was the same answer I would have given. And what really upset me was Mr. Lemon says, yeah, well, the police might try to spin it like that. Mm-hmm. And before the guy could, give a rebuttal, he cuts and goes to commercial. Mm. I will never forget that. And I'm like, this was an opportunity to teach. And he was trying to do that. And they kept it provocative. They might just try to spin it. And how many people agreed with that? Yeah, they're probably just going to try to spin it. No, he could have taught you about why they use force when they use force. Mm-hmm. I started doing the work with the Black Sanctuary because I knew what was behind these conversations. I knew what was missing. And of course, I'm screaming at the television. My wife is like, they can't talk back to you, man. Like, you're gonna have to do something, And I'm like, all right, and so I was receiving calls from friends and family from across the country, Black, white, whoever. And everyone, because people knew my background in law enforcement. Some people knew the things that I'd been through on the other end. Some people knew both. And I was able to educate folks just over on the phone, talking to people and say, well, when someone would say, well, and they would call me with an opinion. Well, the police can't do this. Yes, they can. Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I know I have the right to do this. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, what? And I'm like, where do you get your information from? Well, I saw it on social media. I saw it on YouTube. And I'm like, oh, good God. And so then you have to challenge the things that are already out there that are either, ignorant because people don't know any better, or just ignorant just for ignorance sake, right? Just being like, hey, we're just going to put this information out there. It's provocative and it gets you clicks and views. It's all clickbait. And I wanted to be different than that. And so the things that I talk about, anything that I talk about in relation to police interaction, when I talk about laws, when I talk about your rights and legal obligations, you can always challenge me and look it up. If you don't, Derrick, I don't think that's true. Look it up. And then call me, write me, we'll talk about that, because that's what needs to happen. When I see the protests, and that was another thing that bothered me. I saw the protests and I'm seeing people out there with their creative chants and their beautiful signs that they started coloring, and they would say things and write things that weren't even true. I'm like, where are you getting this stuff from?
Mm-hmm.
You can't change the things that you think are broken if you don't know what it is to begin with. And so that's a lot of the things that I wanted to do was to educate people based on, hey, these are your rights, these are your legal obligations. And once you understand that, now you know how to move forward with the police reform that you want. Because if all you're saying is, we need police reform, what I'm, if I'm on the other end, if I'm a legislator or a politician, or whoever, I'm like, well, what kind of police reform do you need? I don't know. Things need to change. Yeah. Well, guess what? You're going to get what they give you. Okay. All right. You go to Red Lobster and say, just bring me something. And then they give you something. You're going to be like, well, what's this? You just told me to bring you something. You need to know what you're asking for. Okay. And so when I give you this, when I give people this information, it's not only can you use it to protect you and yours and share this information, but now when you want to pursue police reform, you know exactly what it is that needs to change. Policies can be found online. The legislation can be found. All of this stuff is right there on the same little device that everybody wants to watch their twerking videos on. You can also Google and find exactly what you need and the thing that that you want to change for you and your community. And that's what I wanted to see, and that's why I started the Black Sanctuary, to make sure that all of these police interactions that people have will always be as uneventful as possible. Even if you're going to jail, you go to jail alive, right, in one piece. And even on the officer side of that, I know people have this idea. I talk to people across the country of all ages, and they have this idea that police want to use force. That's a hard thing to do, because there's no taking it back. Whether you use force or you use deadly force, there's a difference. And when you use force or deadly force, and especially if you use deadly force, it's very tragic in the sense that now someone has been permanently injured or killed, and now you have to live with that. You have to deal with all of the torment, the mental torment that comes with that, and and I've seen that happen too. That's something that's very challenging, and so I want to make sure that we, as community members of all races, ethnicities, cultures, wherever you come from east to west coast, north to south, that we know how to interact with our law enforcement agencies, that our law enforcement agencies have better ways to connect with their communities. And those are the opportunities that I provide through the Black Sanctuary.
Well, the only way that you can really make change happen is to be armed with the knowledge. And because, like I've said, even when people have gone to jail or been upset with police interactions, I said, I've talked, I mean, obviously there are some bad cops out there, but I said a lot of cops are just following procedure and policy. So if anything, what you really need to do is learn the procedure and the policy, and then
That's right.
say, hey, there's something inherently biased in this policy, or there's something broken within the policy, and that's how you change it. You just don't, anybody can paint a sign and jump up and down and walk up and down the street, but that's not going to actually do anything. Let's talk about the book and what inspired. Then, of course, we can get to the controversy, I guess I'll call it, around your situation with a particular library where you tried.
Oh yeah.
If you want to talk about it, it's up to you.
Oh sure, yeah. I don't shy away from anything.
All right.
So yeah, The Police and Me was I wrote that in 2022. I struggled with it for a little bit because I wasn't sure. I knew it had to be done. At this point, I had already finished a video series, professionally done. It's on YouTube. It's on the Black Sanctuary YouTube channel. We have 10 short videos that will give you information a lot of people have never heard before about police interaction and about how police operate, how the criminal justice system operates. It's very enlightening, and I just haven't marketed it at all because the book has taken over my life. And so the book, The Police and Me, is the children's book from ages 3 to 10 years old. I struggled at first writing it because I wanted to make sure that it addressed a lot of things that I'd heard. I heard from Black parents that said, I have a teenager that's about to be driving soon, and I don't know what to tell them because I don't know what to do when I get pulled over. I've heard from kids that said they didn't want to get their license because they're afraid to get pulled over by police. And I heard that from black, white, brown, tan, whoever. I heard that from everybody, lots of teenagers. And when I thought about certain situations that I was in law enforcement where I saw kids that were preteens or younger having poor interactions with police on their part, cursing at the police, calling them derogatory names and racist names, and or sometimes all of the above. Not kidding. And I saw that, and I thought about that while I was writing the book. At one point, I realized that the book is basically just a conversation between me and my little guy, Duke. He's also in the book. Duke was uh, 4 years old, 3 years old at the time that I wrote the book. I made him six um, for the book just so we could have better dialogue. But when I wrote the book, I wanted to make sure that kids had a good idea about who the police are and what they do. And when you know who they are and what they do and what they're supposed to do, when they do the wrong thing, you also know that it's wrong. Okay. But the biggest takeaway from the book that I was really proud of, and I'm very proud of, is what to do when you interact with police. Those are conversations that don't happen. I don't care how many career days that people have, and the officer comes to school, or even school resource officers that are in schools. They don't talk about these things like this. That isn't a program where it's expected across the country that they're going to interact with kids and teach them these things. The more you know at a young age, whether you like the police or not, I'm not here to make you love the police or hate the police. I'm just giving you the information. This book gives you the information in a very basic way. I even started it with the traffic stop. Me and Duke get pulled over, and I go through the steps. It's narrated by Duke on what to do as the driver. So he sees me. Okay, Papa stops the car, takes the keys out of the ignition, puts them on the dash, turns on the radio, rolls down the windows, hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, and he's seeing all of this. The kids learn this. Now the parents learn it. And I got to tell you, before I proceed, it was just put into practice in my own home because my wife got pulled over a few days ago.
Oh,
And
now
got a
wait a
ticket.
minute. Wait a minute. What was it?
Yeah, man.
Speeding? It's
She
speeding,
was
wasn't it?
speeding, but she
Yep.
was
Yep.
speeding. She was in the
Mm-hmm.
wrong. She was in the wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and she knew it. And she was pulled over by Washington State Patrol. And I was so proud of every aspect of what she told me. She got pulled over. She said, she was like, "Hey, I did everything that you taught me to do. I turned off the music because they always listen to music on the way to school. Um, Turned down the music, windows down, engine off, her hands were on the top of the steering wheel. Duke, in the book, I tell him what to do, so Duke knew what to do. His hands were on his lap, and I was like, okay, cool. And so she says the state patrol, the trooper, he comes up and says that she was doing 76. I think she was doing 76, but he wrote it for 10 under because he didn't want to get her too jammed up in that situation. So he said, I'm going to write it for, that you were only going 10 over, excuse me, that she was only going 10 over. And, but one of the things that he noted when she was, had her hands on the steering wheel and she gets confirmation before she moves, which I tell everyone, when they say, go get your license and registration, don't just reach for it. Can I reach for it? Yes. And he keeps telling her, hey, you're good. You're fine. She's like, okay. But she didn't take that. She was like, so she gives it to him. And he says, well, I need your registration. Okay. It's in my glove compartment. He's like, okay. She's like, can I get it? And he says, you're fine. Go ahead and get it. And so she did it. And the officer goes back, writes her the ticket, comes back. My kid, Duke, he's the star of the book. He goes on these book tours with me and does autographs and all of that. So he loves interacting with police and firefighters. And so he's like, bye, have a nice day. And the officer turns around and comes and gives him stickers and stuff like that. That is the ideal traffic stop to me, man. Like, that's how it should go. That's what you should do. I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you're from. this is how you interact from the private citizen side. And I was very happy to hear how that officer interacted with them. And even, just, the interaction he had with my son, as he departed, as he concluded the traffic stop, that was great. And those are the things that I love to see. Um, the question you initially
Well,
asked me.
well, well, the other question was just about the Bellevue situation. But before you
Oh,
go, but before you go into that, or whatever else you were going to say, I think it it's important for people to also make sure you have documentation in the car, like insurance cards that are up to date, registration, those kinds of things. Because in fact, the last time I was pulled over, and the guy was like super nice. Um, I was speeding a little bit. He wasn't going to get me for that. In fact, I wound up talking to the guy for like 10 minutes actually. But I couldn't find I was driving somebody else's car and I had like an old insurance. So, you have to have the current insurance because they got to make sure you have insurance. And he waited for 10 minutes while I made phone calls and tried to get a photo of the real one and all. And he said, "Oh, never mind. Just slow down." So I think that I think if you're more prepared, then and some of the things that you've imparted in your book, that you're more confident. So if you do get pulled over, you don't go into this immediate like, I'm frantic. What am I going to do? You say, oh, put your hands on it, ask, can you open the glove box, all of those kinds of things. So I think that whole kind of role play that you go through with the book, I think will stay in the backs of people's minds. I think so. But go ahead and say.
I, I hope no, I hope so. That's the whole intent. Is I want people to be empowered.
Hmm.
That was the whole thing, and behind everything that I do, I want people to be empowered. Because when the one word that I heard more than anything, Kevin, was fear. I'm in fear of the police. When I see the lights come on, I'm scared to death. Um, I've heard kids say, when a police officer came up to talk to them, I thought I was going to die. I thought he was going to kill me. Children, and that bothered me a great deal. Uh, and it just as much, not as much as kids saying that they didn't want to get their license, they didn't want to experience this wonderful rite of passage that we have and privilege that we have, in the United States to get a driver's license at 16 years old. And I wanted people to understand, if you understand these things in a way that you know what to do, you know what not to do, you're empowered. And so yeah, I know I'm a black man. I'm not a small guy. The lights come on behind me. It's just like, stop me from where I'm trying to get to. I don't worry about it. I don't get nervous. I know exactly what to do. And then when the conversation starts going beyond the traffic stop, I know when to stop talking. And I think that's important for people to know too. Know your rights, know your legal obligations. And I think the more you know about that, the better off you're going to be. I want, one of the things that I try to do with the book as well is have these conversations not only between parent and child, but police departments across the country have been buying these books it started off by the dozens, but immediately it was by the hundreds and now by the thousands that they buy these books all in bulk to go back out to schools and hand these books out to schools and have these conversations and these interactions with kids starting right there. Right. So that's part of my national ambassador campaign, is for these police officers to be able to go out, use this book as a tool to connect with the youth in their community. And now you can have better dialogue. And the pictures I get from that, I'm telling you, like, I love it. And, it just warms my heart every time I see these kids interacting and hands raised, asking questions. And it's just, it's one of those things that I really wanted for the book. When you were talking about the situation that I recently experienced, it was I was irritated when people started calling this book a black book, all right? Because there's a black father and son, me and my little guy, on the book. And so they see this, and because it's a black father and son on the cover, and I'm dead serious, I've heard this from different professionals in certain organizations, oh, is this book just for Black people, or is this just for Black kids? Is it just for Black parents? Um, and that irritated me at first because I'm like, well, why is that? Well, they see the cover, and I had to think like, well, do I look at movie posters the same way? And see two white folks on a movie poster, and just if I see Sandra Bullock and George Clooney floating in space, I don't think it's a white folk space adventure. I just think it's a movie about space, right? And so to they've assigned this and put this in a category that is for Black kids because it's a Black issue. But the worst thing that I've had to deal with so far, and I hope this is the worst that it gets, is I called. We've since talked and resolved some issues, and we're moving forward and working together. But I was calling. I'm getting ready to do some free events around the book, and just to offer to go to libraries, bookstores around this area and the Puget Sound area. And I wanted to put on free events to educate the public, help parents and kids get out the house for the summer, that type of thing. And so I had my admin call this library. It's the first call we made, by the way. And the librarian, once the librarian looks up my book, and immediately her tone changes. And she says, oh, the Black author. Oh, okay. The Black sanctuary. Oh, okay. And then it was the hum and haw. Well, I'm not sure. This library, we don't. Well, is he willing to go other places that's more appropriate for this conversation? Because this X library is a white library, and we are a white community. There's some Asian, but we're a white community. And, he might want to go some places that are more appropriate for these conversations. I know that there's some people that are, feel uncomfortable with the police, but, we're a white community. I'm like, and I'm listening. Now, by the way, I'm listening to this. This was a training that I was doing with my admin because I wanted to make sure she was, breaking down everything, articulating everything the right way and representing me. And she did a great job. She's a Black woman as well. And she was bothered by it. But it was one of those things, Kevin, I had to make sure that I was sure that I wanted to address. As Black folks, we can come in, race is thrown upon us, at the oddest time sometimes. And here I am calling for a community event. I didn't call there saying, hey, can you gather up all the Black kids in your area and bring them into the library? I didn't mention that. She racialized the situation. And it really disappointed me because, and it actually was kind of a gut punch. I'm doing a free event, and this is the first call we made. And so I actually had her put it on pause for a minute. I'm like, do I need to proceed with this? Is this what I'm going to experience every time I call a library? Am I just a Black author? Is this just a Black book? And, speaking to you, speaking to other people that I met that were appalled by it when I shared it on social media, I learned a lot from other people and how important it was that they're like, hey, we're glad you said something. And it was other people that told me that, other parents that felt the same way I felt, because the first thing I experienced, I thought was, I don't want Duke to go to that library. That was the experience I had. And I thought about other parents, having that same experience. And sometimes they brought it up before I did. Like, Derrick, you have to say something, man. People need to know. I wouldn't want my kid going to that library. And then I'm talking about Black, white, brown, tan, everyone. I love that people embraced it that way. And it taught me a lot because I was admittedly hardened by that, right? Because again, this is something that, of course, I've chosen to do. I know it's a sensitive topic. I know there's some ignorance around it, but to be categorized and making it seem like, the value that I bring to a community isn't there because This is just an issue for for black people.
Well,
I even
okay.
said, like, this isn't just for, black folks. I look at it and I'm like, when did my white friends stop getting pulled over? Like,
Okay, I
when
have
did
to
that
say something.
happen?
I have to say something because my blood pressure is going up. I can feel it. The more you tell me, and I've heard the story already before, and my
Yeah, yeah.
blood pressure still is rising as we speak. However, I guess this is so problematic and absurd on so many levels. I mean, for one thing comes to mind is that, and this is where I want you to tell me what happened after this, to kind
Hmm.
of keep us up to date on it. But is
Hmm.
that this person is making those kinds of decisions with that type of ignorance is, I mean, that's the first thing I think of, because I'm thinking, what else has she said to other people and what else is she capable of saying? And you put somebody in a position that's making a decision on whether or not an author can do an event in the library, and this is the lack of, I mean, lack of cultural competence is an understatement. The other thing, and you brought it up, was that I watched a movie last night that was set in Sweden. I didn't see any black people in it. Okay, but I never once thought, oh, well, this movie is only for white people because there's nothing but Swedish people in this movie, right? And there's so many instances of that. But I think that we live
Hmm.
in this society where white is considered kind of the, well, what's the right word? The default or something. And everything else is different. Everything else is potentially subpar because it's not white. And like,
Hmm.
people of all races, ages, demographics, sexual orientations have interactions with the cops. So I mean, it would be different if you said, I don't know, if it was, uh, if you're black and get stopped by the cops, this book's for you.
Right.
You're talking
Yeah.
about getting stopped from the cops. I know a lot of white folks, and there's probably a white person getting stopped right now down the
Right now.
street. But go ahead,
Yeah.
tell me. So tell me what happened then.
So yeah, and I think to your point also, what I didn't mention is one of the things that really irritated me was this was just her reaction to a caller. We didn't set an appointment with her. We just randomly called the library. And you feel comfortable saying this on the phone? Like this is what you feel comfortable saying? Um, it told me, initially it felt like there's a deep issue going on with this library or this entire library system. And so, I mean, after that, after I addressed it, I heard from a couple of people in that particular city and from the library system. They reached out, said that they wanted to talk, and of course, I'm all about that, right? Again, I was very I didn't want to bring it up to begin with. I mean, we deal with race all the time, but I didn't. It was one of these things. I enjoy what I do so much. I get to talk to these kids and I get to teach and educate and share this information, write books. I don't want to get involved in this nonsense, but I knew it was something that needed to be done. I ended up speaking to one of their outreach folks, one of the outreach executives, and we had a great conversation. Was very apologetic, and then talked about the importance of, well, this is important, that your book is very important. We'd like to do some things with you. And I'm like, okay, but I want to speak to your executive director.
Mhm.
Right. The fact that I haven't bothered me. And there was the level of this particular, the executive director talks a lot about inclusivity and things like that. And I'm former law enforcement, so I do my research on anybody I'm going to interact with. And so, like, I
Mhm.
started digging up, and I was digging up on her, and I was like, okay, well, she talks a lot about this. How come I haven't heard from her? And initially, and a lot of times, and I think I speak for, I think I speak for a lot of people of color, and I want people to realize this: when you start saying that you really love the diversity in your city, or we appreciate the diversity, and you're white, I think it's important for you to look at the population that makes up your diversity and ask them what their experience is, because I don't have the same experience
Mhm.
with this diversity that you get to appreciate when I'm dealing with racism. When I get to call a public institution to do a free event to educate children and families, and I'm put into the category of being a black author. All right, this is a black book. You know, we don't feel like that, and so I think it's important for people to understand that when you experience these things, you have to talk to the people that you say that you enjoy the inclusivity. It doesn't feel very inclusive.
Well, let me
I'll
ask
tell
you
you
this.
that.
In speaking with whoever you did speak to, did they ever say
Hmm.
why that person would even say that? Because a lot of times when I've seen this happen, people say, well, we're sorry, and da 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 da. But I'm just thinking again, my question goes to how can you put a person, if because to me, if you're an institution that is embracing diversity and all that stuff, and I worked for one for over 20 years, you are having training, this kind of thing should not happen, period. Because even if the person has their own inner bias or they're racist or prejudice, the fact that, like you pointed out, that she felt so comfortable even saying it says to me that you, lady, you are totally clueless. So I'm saying, how does that happen? I mean, it's like somebody, like a cop doing something, I don't know, doing something just outrageous that a cop would never do. And you go, how could that cop do that? That's the first thing, it's like, I don't know, taking off in a jet and forgetting to set the flaps and lock the door. How does this even happen?
Basics.
Real
Basics, yeah.
basics.
And yeah, and you would think that, and it's just like that with law enforcement. It's like that with
Yeah.
anything else. And I try to remind people, and I had to remember, because I talk to people again about law enforcement interaction all the time, that these are just regular folks doing
Right.
a very, difficult job, that some people don't do well. And but when they don't do it well, it's not just a poor experience. It could end up into a loss of life. And
Right.
but in this situation, I had to, again, it bothered me, man. And I usually don't let things get to me like this. I'm dead serious. I don't. But it's something that stuck with me for a while. And I had to remember that, what, that's not everybody, because now I'm talking to other people in the system, their library system, and they're like, hey, this shouldn't have happened. We don't know, how, what she was thinking, or and of course I shared more than I shared in the post. I shared more when I spoke to them directly of what I just shared with you about how the conversation actually went. And um and so, I ended up talking to the executive director, and I admittedly got ahead of myself in ways that I was really feeling that this person's just trying to ignore me. They didn't want to. They didn't really want to address the situation. All of this, and this is a lot of it, how I felt, and I think a lot of people of color feel this way sometimes. Is all the DEI talk, it feels performative, right? And like we don't really feel it, because it's just something that's cool to say. DEI, and diversity, and inclusiveness, and it doesn't come off like that sometimes. And so upon speaking to her, she was very well versed in that. Where she's from, I'm very, I know where she's from. And by the way, she's a white woman. I know where she's from, and I had frequented that, at that area while I was in college a lot. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. And because there's a lot of black folks there. And so it made sense for her to have the, um, I guess, just how thorough she was in her explanation and on the subject matter about, why I'm talking about what I'm talking about is so important, and how it affects different people, and how did we get to this point that it was racialized versus, someone just in appreciating the level of work that you're doing. And once I realized that, I felt better about it. And her thing was like, hey, we really would like to continue building this relationship with you. It's a story that needs to be shared. It's an event that we should hold, and we'd love to help you promote it. And I was like, man, that's great, and I was glad to hear that. Again, it was sort of healing for me, I should say, because in my mind, and I'm pretty sure you've had similar experiences where you're just like, man, I'm not dealing with these people anymore. And you feel like that. And it's just like, yeah, it's sometimes it's like, yeah, even when people come off and do racist things, or, very ignorant, biased, discriminating things, you just feel like, man, I don't want to deal with any of these folks. And, but, it really proved that I needed to do more. I needed to go to that community, because I didn't want to work in that community anymore. I was like, you know what, this is what they're about. But it was just one person, right? And I had to come to grips with the fact that, like, you know what, this is obviously something that this community needs to learn a little bit more about. Because if there are other people that think like her, we need to make sure that that they actually understand the real behind it. That this isn't just for Black kids. This isn't just a Black issue. And I actually noted that there was a kid that was killed 2 years ago, 17 years old, a young white kid named Hunter Britton was killed. Terrible traffic stop. A lot of things went wrong. Personally, professionally, I should say, I can look at how things evolved on both sides and see some errors there. But nonetheless, he was a young white kid, and it made national news because of what actually happened. And actually, Benjamin Crump and Al Sharpton used that to get support from other communities, because they were like, hey, this isn't just a Black issue. All right, this is happening to your kids too. And um and so that was just one of those experiences too. So yeah, I'm glad that it's been resolved. We're moving forward doing the events. And again, that's the important thing, is to not get hung up in the emotion of it, but look at the overall goal of what I'm trying to accomplish, and the people that I'm trying to educate and empower, and eventually save lives.
Well, I think it's an emotional issue, but I think and what you've done is you've channeled the emotion into something where there's a positive result. Because I think you can get so emotional, you can get bitter, you can get um, even counterproductive.
Mm.
But what you've done is you've alerted people on social media, which I think is so important, because I think so many people don't think that this level of racism and this type of thing still exists, really, and exists in a place where you wouldn't even think it would even exist. I mean, in a library. I mean, it's not like it's some volatile situation that you were in. You're like in a library in a major city, in a major metropolitan area, trying to do a free event, and you run into something that sounds like something somebody would say 100 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have to wrap this up. What if people want to
Okay.
find out about your company, the book, all of that? This is where you give out all the website information and all that kind of thing.
All right. Yeah. So again, my name is Derrick Dotson, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Black Sanctuary. You can find us at theblacksanctuary.com. It's our website, and we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also Instagram. Um, my book can also be found on Amazon and any place that books are sold online. Once again, it's called The Police and Me. And we also have the version that I recently released this year in Spanish called La Policia y Yo. And very important book. And glad that we had it translated, because we made sure that it was translated so all Spanish speaking individuals would be able to understand it no matter where you're from. It was very well done. And so, yeah, you can find that online as well, too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview, and we look forward to the continuing adventures of the Black Sanctuary.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank my special guest, Derrick